Hey everyone, welcome to SingularityComputers Client Build 22. This one is going to be a bit different to what all of you are used to. Some of the client builds that I've done on my channel have been rebuilds and upgrades where I've received an existing system like this one. So it is something that I've done before, but I've literally just pulled this system out of the box. I don't even know what half of the components are yet, and normally I would also wait until all of the upgrade and replacement components arrive before I start the build log, purely for the sake of presentation. But if I'm going to do more builds and more videos, then I just need to start jumping right into projects, and I'd much prefer to anyway. This is one that I just really want to get started on because, well, it's going to get a custom paint job in a beautiful white pearl, which I'm really looking forward to doing. But let's start by taking a look at the components. We have the Intel Core i7 6700K, the Asus Z170 Deluxe, 32 gigabytes of Corsair Dominator Platinum. Now, the graphics cards are definitely MSI GTX 980 Ti's, and because of the extra PCB width, I'd say that they're Lightnings. Great cards. We have an EVGA SLI bridge. I love these SLI bridges. We have a beautiful EK 400mm reservoir tube, which is perfect for this build. EK plastic reservoir mounts, as you can see. An EK D5 pump with the new pump base and mounting system, and the new EK D5 round acrylic pump top, which I absolutely love. It's a great idea. An XSPC 480mm radiator, 60mm thick. Thermaltake fans, and they have the acrylic ring around the inside for lighting. We have EK water blocks. They're acetal. And we also have EK nickel-plated backplates and the XSPC Raystorm CPU water block. The power supply is the Be Quiet Dark Power Pro 1200 watt, and yes, this is only a fraction of the power supply actually left. And quite frustratingly, some high-end power supplies still don't use all modular cables, which means the only way to sleeve them properly is to completely dismantle the power supply. And one of the first things that I always do when I start a build is start on the custom wiring. So I measure it all up and I immediately get started. And I actually have a new member of the SingularityComputers team working on the custom wiring. He's very experienced, he's done a lot of custom wiring before, but I'm also teaching him how to build high-end water-cooled systems. So I'm really excited about this. He's great. You're going to meet him coming up soon in the near future. So we'll see how that goes. We also have two Samsung 950 Pro 256GB M.2s. And the case is the Thermaltake Core P5. In my opinion, very cool case from Thermaltake. I mean, it's incredibly simplistic, but with the tempered glass cover, just very elegant, and I really like the idea of such a simple design. So I'm just going to use paper towels and also a small container to catch this coolant as I go, because there's no actual drainage system built into this loop, but even if there was, there's always going to be a little bit of coolant left behind. And sometimes it can be very challenging to dismantle a loop without spilling the coolant. Particularly often the graphics cards, if you have memory water blocks, motherboard water block, there's always going to be a bit of coolant caught up in there. So usually I get a container that's smaller than this, sit it in underneath as I pull the tube out so that it can drain into it. It's just really the only way that you can do it. The case is completely stripped, and you can now see just how simple this design actually is. We only have this front motherboard tray section, the rear cover panel, and because this case is wall mountable, we have this large, thick, heavy piece of steel, very strong as you would expect. No rear I/O, just 8 expansion slots. I only have 4 of the slot covers here, and these pieces fit into the corners of the main section of the case as reinforcing, and you can see that they are very thick and strong. Now you can see that quite a bit of coolant managed to leak out of the loop, even though the loop was actually emptied for transport. But as you could see, I mean, you drain a loop, it is never fully empty, so some of the coolant managed to escape, but it didn't get near any of the main components. Only a couple of little drops here and there, so it's really no big deal. Obviously something that you want to avoid, but yeah, no damage was actually done here. So I have all of the components laid out here, ready to be cleaned up, a lot of them replaced, and prepared to be installed into the new upgraded system. And what I have here is a perfect example of what happens when you put a blob of thermal paste in the middle of the CPU. Now this is a subject that I have always avoided. I've never talked about how I do my thermal paste. I've always edited it out and not showed it because people get so argumentative about it. But if you put a blob in the middle of the CPU, you have no way of estimating how much you need. You just have to guess. And you have no idea how much pressure it's going to take to actually spread that blob out. And so this is what happens. What I do is spread a thin, even layer across the entire surface of the CPU. That way you can estimate exactly how much you need. And it's also already spread out. So when the pressure is applied, it's so much easier for it to spread out, push out the air bubbles, and get, you know, a perfect even layer and suction between the water block or the cooler and the CPU. It just works so much better. And you know, you never end up with messes like that. But the case feet, I'm going to leave black because the main part of them is plastic, as you can probably see, this top section. The bottom part is metal, but you don't actually see that anyway. So, I mean, the color scheme is black, white, and blue, so having the black case feet is going to match up perfectly. Now, this front I/O, I would absolutely love to eliminate this, because on a case like this, there's just no need for it. You can get just as easy access to the back of the motherboard, the rear I/O, as you can to the front. It's just, you know, either side of the case. And I mean, this just creates so much mess. All of these extra connections, in my opinion, are absolutely not worth it. I mean, just get a USB hub or a keyboard with USB and audio, because it's much better than having this. I'd love to just put a cover panel over it with a simple Vandal switch, because it would really clean things up. Before I can start on surface preparation, there's a couple of things on the case that I need to repair. But before I get to that, you can see that I have Project Cobalt over here, which I've barely touched since the first part of the build log. I really don't like stopping and starting projects because it can take away some of the passion and the fun, but it's obviously something that I have to do. If I don't have multiple projects going at a time, well, then the videos really start to slow down, just because I'm waiting for parts, for dry time, and all of that. So we have this hole here, which has been drilled. These holes here also need to be cleaned up. And this one here has been cut with a Dremel and then folded back with pliers. So I'm going to clean all of this up and then start on the sanding and surface preparation ready for custom paint. Now, every time you're going to be cutting or drilling, really manipulating a case or anything that's painted for that matter in any way, I suggest that you mask up, because it's obviously going to help to protect the surface. Now obviously we are repainting this case, so it's not that critical, but we're better off not creating more work for ourselves when it comes to the surface preparation. And the tape doesn't do much to protect it, but it's just enough to help a little bit. So let's cut these off with a Dremel. So it's time to start the surface preparation. And I haven't really shown a whole lot of this before, but I mean, look at this case. It, like Dazmode says, it's basically a glorified motherboard tray. I'll put a link in the video description to his channel. Make sure you check it out. He does some really cool stuff. But imagine something like a K-Slabs case, the STH10 or the THW10. Now I paint those all the time, and they also require the same surface preparation. 40 panels roughly for a THW10. So this is an easy one. But I'm going to start with the hard part, which is definitely the inside of this main motherboard tray panel. And the reason this is difficult is because of the folded edges, all of the folds around the holes. Here, you know, these raised threads, that really slows you down when you are sanding. Now, I could easily do this sitting down, or I could do it up on a bench, but I don't know. I just have this thing about bending over and working. Probably it's because when I was in the building trade for 5 years, I spent the entire time bending over and working. You know, 12 hours a day, bending down. And I don't know, maybe I just like it because it brings some more blood to my head and I can actually think straight for once, but who knows what it is. So I like to cut my sandpaper up into little squares. It gives you more control when you have, you know, difficult areas like this. But if I have a nice big flat surface, I'll use a sanding block and a big piece of sandpaper right across it to keep it flat, because that's what you have to watch out for when you're sanding with small pieces like this, is digging holes. You really need to be careful. Now, because this has kind of that satin powder coat, if I don't flatten this out, if I don't do the surface preparation properly, I'm not going to be able to get a proper high gloss finish on the paint job, because the more you paint something with errors in it, the worse they get. So, you know, the tiny little bumps on the satin will just become bigger and bigger and, you know, turn into orange peel. So obviously I'm wet sanding. Mix a bit of soap with the water, just some dishwashing liquid. Makes it more slippery, helps the old paint to flow away more easily because soap is a wetting agent. And you can't even do this without wet sanding. You try to dry sand, it's just going to clog the paper in minutes and you're not going to get anywhere. No doubt you're wondering, how do I know when I've sanded enough? Well, you can do it by feel, obviously, but you can see just up here. Watch what happens when I put the water on the satin surface. You can see that it just flows off. It looks completely waterproof. The water will not stay on the surface, but you can see where I've already sanded it flat, even where I haven't touched it for ages, the water is still sitting there and covering the entire surface. So that is the best way you can tell that the surface is completely flat and smooth. It's 1 hour later, and so far I've only managed to do the rear section of the main part of the case. So I still have these pieces to do, and obviously the front of this piece, but so far I've been over it with 600. I still need to go over it with 800 grit before I can even move on to cleaning up and getting ready for custom paint. So you can see just how much time and effort is involved in this if you're going to get it perfect. And the thing is, if you're doing it for a living, the more perfect you try to get it, the less you're actually going to earn, obviously. but, you know, it's certainly not about that for me. I just want this to be as perfect as possible. But I better leave this one here because I now need to keep going into the night. So thanks for watching, and remember that none of this would be possible without our patrons.